For those of the North Shore of New Brunswick, our thoughts this week have gone out to all the veterans of all the different wars that Canada has served in, but especially one veteran that lives on famously in our thoughts and our appreciation and our memory. Now, Raymond Miles Hickey is probably considered one of the most important pastors in Northern New Brunswick history because of his dedication to the people in his family, in his community, in New Brunswick and across the world. Now, he was a priest, author, and veteran of the Second World War. Now, Raymond Miles Hickey was born in 1905 in Jacquet River, New Brunswick, which is now part of the super village of Beldoon. And his legacy is one that touched my life in many ways. Not only did I grow up reading his famous book, The Scarlet Dawn, which detailed his time serving as a pastor in World War II, but I also had an opportunity to cover his funeral for Dalhousie News in 1987, which was a great moment in time for all that was there. It was a sad time, yes, but it was a celebration of his accomplishments of the people who he touched. Now, better known as Reverend R.M. Hickey, and he was later installed as a Monsignor, he enjoyed a long, illustrious career filled with numerous awards and honors for his many accomplishments. Now, in the St. Thomas Literal Encyclopedia, which is a great dedication site to many historical moments and people in New Brunswick history, it notes that Hickey is the author of 3 books. Of course, I mentioned the Scarlet Dawn, which is celebrating its 70th anniversary this year. It was published in 1949, and which retells his wartime experiences with the famous North Shore Regiment from 1940 to 1945. Now, born 12 September 1905 in Jacquet River, he was the 4th of 11 children born to Alexander and Clara Hickey. Now, the Hickeys were a very religious family, as many of the children went on to become priests or nuns. He attended his local school until age 16, at which point he left to pursue jobs in a lumber mill and on a farm in order to save enough money for his future education. He returned to finish his studies in 1923, attending St. Thomas High School in Chatham, which now is part of the Miramichi City region. He went on to graduate from St. Thomas University as valedictorian of his class in 1928. After graduation, Reverend Hickey attended Holy Heart Seminary in Halifax in the fall of 1928, where he studied philosophy and theology for 5 years. He was ordained at St. Michael's Basilica on 25 June 1933 by Bishop P.A. Chasson, who appointed him and pastored the parish of Notre Dame de Sacré-Cœur in Batters, which is about 35 miles south of his hometown of Jacquet River, where he served from 1933 and 1937. During his time in Bathurst, he aided the community by organizing sports scenes for youth and starting the local scout movement. In 1937, he became a member of faculty at St. Thomas University in Chatham, where he remained for 3 years. But with the war being declared in the fall of 1939, on the 5th of June 1940, the North Shore Regiment mobilized as part of the 8th Brigade, 3rd Canadian Division, and their Lieutenant Colonel Arthur Leger personally requested that Reverend Hickey become a chaplain for the North Shore Regiment. Leger sought approval from the local bishop, who was known for being unenthusiastic about his young priests going off to war. Though the bishop ultimately agreed, Hickey was still unsure about his decision until advice was given him from a fellow priest and resident of New Brunswick, Reverend B.J. Murdoch. Having served in World War I, Murdoch did not hesitate to recommend the experienced younger priest, telling him to go, Father Raymond, you will make a good chaplain. If you are killed, well, you'll save your soul. The regiment, along with Hickey, gathered in Woodstock, New Brunswick on 17 July 1940 to begin training for the war. The North Shore Regiment relocated to Sussex in December of 1940, and in July of the next year, the unit made its way overseas, sailing from Halifax to Liverpool, England. For the next 3 years, the regiment moved around Europe, going through training the entire time. Reverend Hickey actively participated in all these sessions. In My Hobbies 3, published in 1973, he recalls a particular incident in which he passed a group of young soldiers who had fallen out during a 30-mile march. The young men were amazed at how tough the older Father Hickey appeared to be. At the time, I was the venerable age of 36, said Father Hickey, but to them, in their late teens and early 20s, I at 36 was old. I wonder what they would say today if I hobbled by at my age, which was 66 at the time. During his time in the army, Hickey was known for keeping the morale high among the soldiers. He would frequently organize such events as large sing-alongs or sports. In fact, he coached a North Shore Regiment baseball team, which went on to become the champions of the Canadian Army in 1942. Now, in the early hours of the morning of 6 June 1944, D-Day, Hickey was among the first waves of infantry to arrive on the beaches of Normandy, France, to partake of the slaughter that would become known as D-Day. When the beach became filled with wounding and dying soldiers, Reverend Hickey went to each one he could reach, giving them spiritual or medical help. By the time the war ended, Hickey was promoted from captain to major, and also received a military cross from King George VI for exceptional bravery and courage during the landing of Normandy, France, at Saint-Lambert-de-Mer on D-Day, 6 June 1944. Now, Msgr Hickey's legacy lives on in many ways, and especially in the modern era, because if anyone's a fan of the Steven Spielberg movie Saving Private Ryan, there's almost a indirect tribute to Msgr Hickey, because there's no confirmation that Spielberg was inspired on the D-Day landing scenes by the Scarlet Dawn, but there's a lot of parallels to seeing some of the, especially one minister on the beach giving last rites from soldier to soldier. It was a fine remembrance for many people in the Maritimes to see that scene in there, because you could almost imagine Msgr Hickey doing his best to give counsel to dying soldiers, the last rites to dead soldiers, and the ability to bring some calm in the terror of the D-Day landing. Now, Reverend Aram Hickey returned to New Brunswick after the war, where in 1946 he was appointed pastor of St. Thomas Aquinas Church in nearby Campbellton. It was during that time he began writing his first book, The Scarlet Dawn, which was a memoir of the years he spent with the military and overseas. Now, the book was released to much acclaim in 1949, and is still considered one of the greatest military books in Canadian literary history. It was well received, and it was praised by critics, and also elicited feedback from readers about how much they enjoyed the book. Now, Hickey himself commented on the success of the second book, My Hobbies 3. Frankly, its reception surpassed even the high expectations of the author, which are always high. The book itself is comprised of several short pieces written by Hickey, describing in chronological order his experiences and thoughts while serving in the Army. The narrative covers his entire 5-year tenure in the military, beginning with Colonel Leger asking Hickey to become a chaplain. Hickey spares no details as he vividly describes the events experienced during the war, and in turn placing the reader there with him. Throughout the course of the book, Hickey recounts similar memories that he recounted, such as medical exam before entering the Army, the baseball team, visiting Ireland, the death of his father, and many other insights into what he was thinking or going through on the battlefield within that 5-year period. In a review of the book, Melinda Jarrett praises Hickey, saying that even though I have read it at least a dozen times, I can still find a little gem here and there that has me burst into laughter or tears at the sheer simplicity of his wisdom and his profound observations of human nature during wartime. Now, upon his return, Hickey was appointed pastor of St. Mary's in Newcastle, and after completion and blessing of the new church, Hickey was made a Msgr. In 1961, he had some medical difficulties as he suffered a heart attack that forced him into retirement. He stayed at Mount St. Joseph in Chatham, where he kept busy with writing and other activities. When My Hobbies 3 came out, it detailed the hobbies I had taken up since retirement, including writing, painting, and music. Included in the book are also short stories and poems, pictures of some of his paintings, selections of his favorite poems, as well as author biographical information. Now, Msgr Hickey found great solace in these hobbies and believed that they were an important part of life, saying, "A hobby will help to distract our mind from the problem that is gnawing at us. It can help to keep us from introspection and self-pity, and it will also make us look at our problems objectively, to see them in their true light. In 1979, Msgr Hickey was chosen to represent the Canadian RC chaplaincy service at the 35th anniversary of D-Day in France, and this experience formed the subject of his third and final book, D-Day Memories, which came out in 1980. Now, in the tome, Hickey wrote about being chosen for the ceremony and the ceremony itself, as well as revisiting many sites from his war days. Unfortunately, and failing health within the 1980s, he kept active in these within his community, but unfortunately, on the 14th September 1987, he succumbed to natural causes. He was in Jacquet, France, attending the unveiling of a monument to the fallen men of the North Shore Regiment, and some hours after delivering a stirring speech to those there, he died of natural causes, which a lot of people at times said it was fitting, because he visited a place that he felt connected to, and he felt connected to with his fellow soldiers and his congregation's representatives. Now, Msgr Hickey returned to Jacquet River one last time for his funeral, and the funeral, like I said, I attended, and it was quite an afternoon of celebration at the old Jacquet River Church, which dated back at the time to the late 19th century. And his remains now rest at the St. Gabriel Cemetery. Now, all three books are out of print, but there's still copies that do show up on library sources. Jacquet River, New Brunswick's Legion is dedicated to many, many soldiers from the region who served in World War I, World War II, the various conflicts. And Jacquet River itself, he was the unofficial voice of the community, because when anybody talked about Jacquet River, New Brunswick, Msgr Hickey and his legacy would come to mind. I went to school with many of his family and his friends and colleagues, and I felt very honored to be part of a community that saw service that Msgr Hickey showed as a clergy member and as a veteran, a soldier, not say a combat soldier, but someone that supported the efforts of freedom. And on this D-Day anniversary, if obviously, not say there was something missing, but when you say North Shore Regiment, we're unified. The veterans, their family members. I'm a fifth generation North Shore Regiment family member. My family goes back to Vimy and Passchendaele, Ortona, Holland, all the different campaigns. Korea, some in Vietnam, some peacekeeping, some Afghanistan, some the current UN campaigns. It's a unified force that we all look towards peace and freedom, and sometimes you have to go to war to get freedom and peace. And Msgr Hickey in the Scarlet Dawn especially, which I still consider a top 100 military, or what you call veterans recollection book in North American history, not just Canadian history. It should be required reading in every school in Canada for those wanting to know, especially the maritime experience, because from New Brunswick to Newfoundland, there's been many campaigns that we have taken part in, which have changed the course of history. And Msgr Hickey, I think of his legacy, he was only, I can say only 82, but in his only early 80s when he passed away. And we learned so much from him. A lot of people got into that type of understanding of the nonfiction chronology of war books. Again, one of the most important war books in North American history. And I'd like to see this made into a movie one day, but we got Saving Private Ryan and some of the other dedicated creators that have, if you look at some of the World War II movies in Britain in recent years, like Dunkirk, you can feel the spirit of Msgr Hickey, because he dedicated his life to the people that were dedicated to him, and that's a legacy we should all remember and respect. So on this D-Day anniversary day of the landing, we hope you took a chance to listen and watch some of the ceremonies today, to hear the words of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, the young children from the North Shore Regiment that went over in a lot of ways to represent Msgr Hickey, because he couldn't be there today, but he was there in his spirit, and like a person that's in every one of us in the North Shore, in one way or other. Once you learn about Msgr Hickey, it will never leave you. So I dedicate the podcast to him. It has been my honor to give you some information about Msgr Hickey and some of his dedicated life. One podcast can't all cover it, and if you talk to people in the Jacquet River region about their thoughts and their memories of Msgr Hickey, there'd be millions of stories. I know that. And anyway, when I was at that funeral, I'm just saying I felt the presence of greatness, and he was looking down and said, boys, you gotta keep her going. Respect the veterans, and protect the memory of those who served, and their service must live on because we cannot remember enough the way that people kept the world free to one small country of 15, 20 million people. It's amazing what we did, and Msgr Hickey was part of that. So anyway, have a good evening. Take care. Bye.